Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. When my wife of 7 years accused me of something I never did, expecting me to apologize, I realized that I can't keep bending to her whims and caprices. Our relationship had deteriorated gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a photograph slowly fading in sunlight. But this final act broke everything. My name is Jeff. We'd been married in our late 20s, both of us ready to settle down and build a life together. The first few years were good enough, not perfect. We had the normal adjustments that come with marriage, the learning curve of sharing space and making joint decisions. But somewhere around year 4 or 5, things changed. The warmth gradually disappeared from our interactions. Conversations became merely about transactions, about bills, schedules, household tasks. The small gestures of affection that had once been natural became rare, then non-existent. We stopped doing a lot of the things we usually do. Arguments became more frequent about small, petty things that left a residue of resentment. Kelly's tone, when she spoke to me, grew colder and sharper. There was an edge to her words that hadn't been there before. She finds ways to disrespect me. I worked a demanding but stable job, with decent pay and benefits. I left early most mornings, and usually got home around 6:30 in the evening. I provided financial stability for us, paid the mortgage on time, kept our savings growing, and made sure we could afford the comfortable middle-class life we'd built. Kelly worked part-time as an administrative assistant at a medical office. She'd scaled back to part-time after we got married, saying she wanted more flexibility and less stress. I'd supported that decision. Her income covered her personal expenses and contributed to some household costs, while my salary carried the bulk of our financial obligations. But somewhere along the way, our marriage had become less about partnership and more about power dynamics and control games. Kelly started testing me emotionally. That's the only way I can describe it. She'd give me the silent treatment over minor things, if I forgot to pick something up from a store, or if I made plans with friends without checking with her first. She'd withhold affection as a form of punishment, creating an atmosphere of tension until I apologized and made things right. I fell into a pattern of appeasing her. It was easier to apologize and smooth things over than to stand my ground and endure days of cold silence. I told myself I was choosing my battles, being the bigger person, prioritizing peace in our home. What I didn't realize was that I was teaching her that manipulation worked. The incident that finally changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in late September. I'd been at the office later than usual, wrapping up a project timeline for a new commercial development. We were behind schedule due to some permit delays, and I'd stayed until nearly 8 trying to coordinate with our subcontractors and update our client on the revised completion date. When I walked through the front door a little after 8, I could feel the tension slowly, but I found my way to the bedroom, kept my things, and went to shower. A few minutes into my bath, I could hear my phone ringing. I hurried up, but when I came out of the bathroom, my wife, Kelly, was in the bedroom holding my phone. Kelly looked up at me when I walked in, and her expression was cold. She asked why Samantha was calling me after hours. I was confused for a second with the question. Samantha worked in our accounting department, handling payroll and expense reports. We interacted regularly for work purposes, but had zero personal relationship. I explained as plainly as I could. Samantha is probably calling about a project report. She was processing some payroll documentation and needed clarification on client billing codes for one of our active projects. Kelly didn't accept the explanation. Instead, she doubled down. She pointed out that it was over 9 o'clock at night. Normal coworkers didn't call that late. There must be something more to it. I felt exhaustion wash over me. I just spent hours dealing with construction delays and frustrated contractors. I didn't have the energy for whatever this was turning into. I sighed before responding, trying to keep my tone calm, but I'm sure the weariness came through. I explained that Samantha was probably working late herself, trying to get reports done for the month-end closing. The timing was purely about work deadlines, nothing else. I asked her to give me the phone so that I could call Samantha back to hear from her. Kelly seized on my tone immediately. She said I was acting like she was crazy for asking a reasonable question, that I was being disrespectful in how I was talking to her. Then she delivered her ultimatum. She told me I could sleep on the couch until I learned how to talk to her with proper respect. And until I apologized for another woman calling me that late at night. I stood in our bedroom, lost for words to say. The reasonable part of my brain understood that I could probably de-escalate this. I could apologize for my tone, continue reassuring her that I have nothing to do with Samantha, and promise to be more mindful about communication. We'd go back to normal, or at least our version of normal. But another part of my brain, a part that had been slowly waking up over months of these control games, recognized something important. I had done nothing wrong. A coworker had called me about work, and I offered to call this coworker back in her presence, but she refused. I'd explained the situation clearly. My tone had been tired, not disrespectful. And now I was being punished, ordered to sleep apart from my wife, until I apologized for something that didn't warrant an apology. I looked at Kelly and gave her a simple response. If sleeping on the couch was what she wanted, I'd do it. I could see surprise flash across her face. She'd expected resistance, expected me to argue, plead, or try to talk her out of it. That was our usual pattern. She'd make some demand, I'd push back initially, she'd dig in, and eventually I'd cave to restore peace. Instead, I walked to our bedroom, gathered a pillow and blanket, and moved them to the guest room down the hall. The guest room had been largely unused for years, except as a storage space. We kept the door closed most of the time. It had a double bed, a dresser, and several boxes of miscellaneous items we'd never fully unpacked from our last move. I cleared off the bed, made it up with the sheets that were in the closet, and settled in for the night. The silence of my compliance seemed to unsettle Kelly more than an argument would have. Over the next few days, she tried various tactics to make the guest room situation uncomfortable for me. She switched off the Wi-Fi router every night before bed, cutting off my internet access. She stopped cooking entirely, even though she'd usually make dinner for both of us most evenings. She avoided speaking to me, moving through the house like I wasn't there. I didn't react to any of it. I started leaving for work earlier, which meant I avoided the tense morning atmosphere entirely. I'd stop at a diner near my office for breakfast, eggs and coffee, while reading the news on my phone. I'd eat lunch out with coworkers or grab something quick. After work, I'd pick up dinner for myself, sometimes takeout, sometimes groceries to cook something simple in our kitchen. I kept sleeping in the guest room without complaint, maintained my composure throughout. Kelly started making snide remarks when our paths crossed in the house. She'd comment about my little man cave, make sarcastic observations about how much I must be enjoying my vacation from our marriage. My responses stayed brief and calm. I'd acknowledge her comments politely, sometimes with a slight smile, but I didn't take the bait for an argument. Emotionally, something was shifting inside me during this time. I started recognizing patterns in our marriage that I'd been ignoring or minimizing for years. The way Kelly used withdrawal and silence as punishment. The way she'd create tests and obstacles, then judge my responses. The way peace in our home was always contingent on my giving in to whatever she wanted. I realized how much tension had been simmering under the surface of our relationship for so long. I'd been so focused on keeping things smooth, on avoiding conflict, that I'd never stopped to ask whether I was actually happy. The answer, I realized, was no. I hadn't been happy in a long time. After sleeping in the guest room for a week, I decided to actually make the space comfortable. I spent a Saturday morning cleaning it out properly, moved the storage boxes to the garage, dusted and vacuumed thoroughly, brought in some of my clothes from the master bedroom, jeans, shirts, work clothes, moved my personal items, books, laptop, headphones. I set up a small desk in the corner using an old table from the garage, brought in my old gaming monitor, and hooked up my PlayStation that had been collecting dust in the closet for years. Set up a basic gaming area where I could decompress after work. I brought in the coffee maker from the kitchen and set up a small station on the dresser. Added a mini fridge I found on Facebook Marketplace for $30. I even hung curtains, navy blue ones that Kelly had vetoed, when I'd suggested them for our living room a year earlier. She'd said they were too dark. I'd always liked them. The guest room transformed from a temporary sleeping spot into something more personal. A quiet zone that was entirely mine. A space without tension or judgment or unspoken expectations. And I noticed something interesting. I was sleeping better. Without the hostile atmosphere of our shared bedroom, I felt more rested. I'd lie in bed reading before sleep, something I'd stopped doing years ago. I'd wake up feeling less on edge. I ate my meals in peace, either in the guest room or at the kitchen counter when Kelly wasn't around. Started cooking more, nothing complicated, but actual meals instead of just reheating leftovers. I felt lighter somehow, less weighed down. Meanwhile, Kelly was growing increasingly irritated. I could see it in how she moved through the house. Doors slammed harder. Her comments became more pointed. She complained that I was acting childish, that I was enjoying my little vacation too much, that I clearly didn't care about our marriage. The thing was, she was right about one thing. I did seem happier. Because I was. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly anxious about saying or doing the wrong thing. Wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to avoid her next test or punishment. I was just existing. Peacefully. By the third week, I could sense Kelly's frustration reaching a new level. Her tactic had backfired completely. She'd expected the discomfort of sleeping apart and her cold treatment to push me to cave, to apologize, to beg to come back to our bedroom. That's what had always happened before. Instead, I seemed perfectly content in the guest room. She started nagging more frequently, though we still barely spoke. When we did cross paths, she'd make comments about how I was acting like our marriage meant nothing. How I clearly didn't care about working through our problems. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was making dinner. She asked if I really was just going to keep this up indefinitely. If I were really that comfortable throwing away 7 years of marriage over a simple disagreement. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her calmly. I told her I'd been trying to make our marriage mean something for years. But peace had to go both ways. It couldn't just be me constantly accommodating, constantly apologizing for things that didn't warrant apologies, constantly being tested and punished. She didn't like that response. Accused me of being dramatic. Said I was the one creating problems by refusing to just apologize and move past this. I didn't argue with her. Just went back to making my dinner. By the end of 4th week, Kelly pushed even harder. She tried guilt, reminding me of our wedding vows, of the promises we'd made. She threw insults, calling me emotionally stunted, saying I clearly had commitment issues. She complained that I'd become emotionally distant, that I'd checked out of our marriage. That last accusation was true, I realized. I had checked out emotionally. Not suddenly, but gradually over weeks of sleeping separately and recognizing all the patterns I'd been ignoring. I detached without fully realizing it was happening. And once I recognized that detachment, I understood something else. I was done. I took a long lunch break one afternoon and drove to a law office across town. I'd found the attorney through a simple internet search, a family law specialist with good reviews. The lawyer's office was modest but professional. He invited me in, offered coffee, and asked what brought me in. I explained my situation factually and calmly. 7 years married. No children. We owned a house together and had some shared assets. The marriage had deteriorated into control games and emotional manipulation. I wanted a divorce. The lawyer asked thoughtful questions. Had we tried marriage counseling? Were there specific incidents of abuse or infidelity? I explained that there was no abuse in the traditional sense and no infidelity that I knew of. Just years of a dysfunctional pattern where Kelly would test me, punish me, and demand apologies for things that didn't warrant them. I tried to communicate about the issues many times. She'd either dismiss my concerns or turn them around to make me the problem. I'd simply reached the end of my tolerance for living that way. The lawyer nodded with understanding. He'd clearly seen situations like mine before. He explained the divorce process in Arizona, the paperwork, the timeline, and what to expect. Since we had no children and both worked, It should be relatively straightforward. We'd need to divide marital assets and property. Given that we'd been married 7 years and both contributed financially, we'd likely be looking at roughly equal division. He quoted me his fees. I agreed to them. We spent the next hour going over details about our assets, the house, savings accounts, retirement funds, and vehicles. A week later, the lawyer called to say the divorce papers were ready. I went to his office during my lunch break, reviewed everything carefully, and signed where needed. Paid the retainer fee. Took copies of all the documents home. I waited a few more days, thinking about the right timing. Then, on a Tuesday evening, I came home from work and Kelly wasn't there yet. She had a book club on Tuesdays and usually got home around 8. I took the divorce papers from my bag and laid them out on our dining room table. I took a sheet of paper and wrote a simple note in my handwriting. I'm not angry, just tired of living like a guest in my own home. I placed the note on top of the papers where she'd see it immediately. Then I went to the guest room and waited. I heard Kelly's car pull into the driveway around 8:15. Heard her come through the front door. The usual sounds of her arriving home, keys in the bowl, bag dropped near the entryway. Then silence. I imagined her seeing the papers on the table, walking over, picking them up, reading. A few minutes later, her footsteps came quickly down the hall. The guest room door flew open without a knock. Kelly stood in the doorway, divorce papers in her hand. Her face a mixture of shock and anger. She demanded to know what this was. If I were serious. If I really thought I could just end our marriage like this. I stayed seated at the small desk, turned slightly to face her, but remained calm. I told her the papers were self-explanatory. That, yes, I was serious. She couldn't seem to process it. She thought this whole thing was still a game between us, another round in our ongoing power struggle. She'd expected me to eventually crack, to come back apologizing, to return things to normal. She never imagined I'd actually move toward divorce. She started talking, her voice getting louder, saying I was overreacting. This was all because of one argument about a phone call. I was being ridiculous. She accused me of cheating, and instead of apologizing, I decided to end the marriage. I shook my head quietly. I told her this wasn't about one phone call or cheating. It was about a pattern that had defined our marriage for years. Her need to control, to test, to punish. My exhaustion from constantly trying to maintain peace by giving in. The realization that we weren't partners. We were adversaries in an ongoing battle. I told her she'd wanted space, and she got it. She'd wanted control, and she got that too. Now I wanted peace. The words seemed to hit her differently than she expected. She fell silent for a moment, just staring at me. Then she shifted tactics. Said she wouldn't sign the papers. That we could work through this. That every marriage had rough patches. I didn't argue. Just told her that it was her choice. But I was moving forward with the divorce regardless. Over the next few days, Kelly went through various stages of response. First was refusal. She left the papers untouched on the dining table. Acted as if she didn't acknowledge them, they'd go away. Then came emotional manipulation. She tried to reminisce about good times from early in our marriage. Remind me of our wedding day, our honeymoon, moments when we'd been happy together. I listened politely but stayed detached. Those good memories were real, but they didn't change the current reality. When manipulation didn't work, anger returned. She said I was going to regret this. That she'd make sure I paid for cheating on her and giving up on us. That her lawyer would get her everything. The house, my retirement savings, whatever she wanted. I nodded calmly at her threats. Told her to take what she needed. I just wanted my peace. That line seemed to land with particular impact. She stared at me like she was finally understanding that I genuinely didn't care about the material things. That no amount of threatened financial loss would make me stay in a marriage that had become toxic. About a week after I'd left the papers, Kelly's approach changed again. She came to the guest room one evening, knocked softly, and asked if we could talk. Her voice was quieter than it had been, less confrontational. She asked if maybe we could try counseling, work through our differences. She'd be willing to try if I were. I looked at her tiredly. Told her I'd suggested counseling multiple times over the years. She'd always dismissed it, said we didn't need it, and accused me of making mountains out of molehills. I tried talking for years. She just never listened. She would turn my concerns around, make them about my failings rather than our relationship patterns. It was too late now. I was done. The divorce process officially began shortly after that conversation. Both of us retained attorneys. Kelly hired a lawyer known for aggressive representation in divorce cases. She was clearly planning to fight for maximum settlement. I told my lawyer that I'm okay with a 50-50 split on everything. The house would need to be sold, and the equity divided equally. Bank accounts split. We'd each keep our own retirement accounts and personal property. My lawyer warned me that this might be overly generous given the circumstances, but I insisted. I wasn't interested in a prolonged legal battle. I wanted a clean break. The process dragged on for months. Back and forth between lawyers. Kelly is stalling on various points. Her attorney is pushing for more favorable terms. My attorney responded with calm professionalism. There were moments of tension, disagreements about specific things, about what qualified as marital property versus personal property, but nothing that couldn't be resolved with patience and compromise. By 6 months in, most details were settled. The house went on the market, sold within 2 months to a young couple just starting out. The equity was split as agreed. Furniture was divided based on a list we'd each made of what we wanted. Bank accounts were separated. All joint credit cards and obligations have been resolved. We each took one of our 2 cars. Divided household items methodically. The final hearing was scheduled for almost exactly 1 year after I'd first left the divorce papers on the table. We both appeared before the judge with our attorneys. The judge reviewed the settlement agreement, confirmed that both parties understood and accepted the terms, and asked the standard question about whether there was any chance of reconciliation. I stated clearly that there was not. Kelly hesitated for a moment, then agreed. The judge granted the divorce decree. Just like that, our 7-year marriage was legally dissolved. I walked out of the courthouse into bright Arizona sunshine, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief predominantly, but also sadness, not for losing Kelly specifically, but for losing what I'd hoped marriage would be. Kelly tried to catch me in the parking lot, tried to talk with me, but I declined politely. Told her there was nothing left to discuss. I wished her well and got in my car. I'd already found a new apartment and moved in the week before the hearing. A 1-bedroom place in a different neighborhood, away from the areas we'd frequented together. Enough space for me and my needs. I furnished it simply. Life became noticeably simpler. I made my own schedule. Woke up when I wanted on weekends. Ate what I made on my own schedule. No more navigating around someone else's moods or managing tension-filled evenings. The apartment stayed peaceful. No doors slamming. No hostile silences. No tests or punishment games. Just quiet, comfortable solitude. I joined a recreational basketball league that played on Tuesday evenings. Something I'd always wanted to do, but never pursued, because Tuesdays were Kelly's book club nights, and she'd wanted me home. Started hiking on Saturday mornings with a group I found through a meetup app. Discovered trails around Phoenix I'd never explored before. Work became less stressful, too. I wasn't carrying the weight of home tension into the office anymore. Wasn't distracted by wondering what mood Kelly would be in when I got home, or what small thing might trigger the next round of silent treatment. Financially, the divorce had cost me. Lost half the equity in the house that I'd put significant money into over the years. Paid substantial legal fees. Divided savings accounts that had taken years to build. On paper, I was in a worse financial position than before. But I found myself not caring about any of that as much as I'd expected. When I sat in my apartment in the evenings, reading or gaming or just existing in peace, I'd think about what I'd gained versus what I'd lost. I'd lost money, sure. Lost the house and half the furniture and a chunk of savings. But I'd gained something that felt infinitely more valuable: peace of mind, self-respect, the ability to live without constantly monitoring someone else's mood, freedom from a pattern of manipulation and control that had been slowly eroding who I was. I realized that all the financial loss was worth it for that gain. I thought I'd feel bitter about giving up so much in the settlement, expected to feel regret or resentment about the cost of the divorce. Instead, I felt grateful. Grateful I'd gotten out when I did. Grateful I'd recognized the pattern and dared to walk away. Grateful that peace and self-respect turned out to be worth more than furniture and savings. I took some time to reflect on everything I'd learned. I learned that boundaries matter more than I'd realize. I'll never again accept a dynamic where one person has all the control and the other person does all the accommodating. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from someone who doesn't know how to love you properly. Kelly taught me what I don't want in a relationship, what patterns to watch for, and the red flags to take seriously. She taught me that a person can say they love you while treating you in ways that show they don't respect you. She taught me that sometimes the hardest decision is also the right decision. And she taught me that I'm capable of choosing myself, even when it costs me financially, even when it means being alone, even when it means ending something I'd invested 7 years in. I'm grateful for those lessons, even though I wish I'd learned them less painfully. I found happiness by choosing myself, by walking away from a situation that was slowly eroding who I was, by recognizing that some relationships aren't worth saving, no matter how many years you've invested. I didn't leave because I stopped loving Kelly. I left because I started loving myself again. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference.